So the best vacation I've taken in Canada, I would say Prince Edward Island.
Point Pelly, Soup River on Vancouver Island.
Montreal, 𝗔𝗯𝘂.
Hi, I'm Ian Hanomansing in Vancouver. Welcome to Cross Country Checkup, the podcast. Our question, what's the best vacation you ever had in Canada? What's the most outstanding thing you did this summer? Forget planes, trains, and automobiles. I'm thinking the quintessential Canadian vacation movie could be called Small SUVs, Kayaks, and Motorcycles. You'll see what I mean when you hear three guests we'll be connecting with. They have great stories about treks across Canada, and so do our callers. On this Labor Day weekend, the unofficial end of summer, let's savor the nostalgia. Our question, what's the best vacation you ever had in Canada? What's the most outstanding thing you did this summer? In the last half hour, we'll talk to an extreme traveler who's riding his dirt bike from coast to coast in search of the best Canadian cuisine. I'm Ian Hanomansing in Vancouver. From CBC Radio, this is Check Up the Podcast. So our next guest used a dirt bike, is still using a dirt bike to see a lot of this country, and he's eating some really interesting meals. Kix Marshall is an author and adventurer, originally from Red Deer, Alberta. He began his current journey in March. His first stop at BC's 𝗂𝗓𝗂𝗁, which we just heard about. We've reached him in Bridgetown, Nova Scotia, about 1.5 hours west of Halifax. Hi, Kix.
Hello, Ian. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for connecting with us. And I'm going to have to take a break midway through this conversation. In fact, I may even interrupt you because we break after the first hour on television, then continue on radio. But let's start the interview. Let's start by asking why would you decide to crisscross Canada in a little dirt bike?
Ian, there's no better way to see the country than on a dirt bike. I'd originally done a trip a few years back from Canada to Argentina on a different bike. And along the way, I got to meet lots of cultures and local people. And after I got back from that trip, I realized I didn't know anything about Canadian culture and the countryside itself and hadn't traveled much of it. And I thought the best way to see the country was little bit by little bit through the eyes of each person's kitchen on the back of a dirt bike.
And let's not lose sight of what you just said in case somebody's, driving, listening on the radio going, what you took a motorcycle from Canada all the way down to Argentina.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to blow it over, but that was the last trip, and this is a new one. Yeah. But I did bike a different time, from Canada to Argentina, and ticked off all of the countries in between except for Venezuela. It was closed at the time. And that trip was amazing. That was a great way to see that part of the world. And on the back of that, I wanted to see this part of the world being Canadian.
Yeah. So one of the things about this trip in Canada is that it's kind of revolving around food experiences. And describe one of the notable moments for you in terms of food.
Yeah, for sure. There's been a lot. The country is incredibly blessed with so many rich cultural backgrounds and so many different foods that come with it. And the plan was to get to know people through their kitchen. So if I contacted them and asked them sort of what their culture was and what the connection to food was, a lot of people invited me in for dinner or for lunch and showed me how to make what their local cuisine was. And a few of the highlights for sure was up in the northern part of British Columbia, up around the Nass Valley area. And I met a guy there who took me to a local smokehouse in their community, and they were smoking sea lion. And I'd never in my life considered the fact that you could eat sea lion, or that people did. And they showed me how they smoked it. They showed me how they cooked it. And he invited me back to his house for sea lion ribs one night. We barbecued sea lion ribs around the family barbecue, then sat down in the kitchen. And he explained the culture of where they'd come from and why they ate the food and how it was still significant to them. It was a really neat experience and something you can't buy, you can't Google, you can't show up at a restaurant. You just have to be invited in to have it.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. We are live here with Kix Marshall, and do stay with us, Kix. We're going to take that break right now. For those of you who are watching on CBC News Network, actually on the television broadcast, let's go back to Kix's shot, because in behind him, you can actually see the dirt bike, I think, that he's still taking as he crisscrosses across Canada. But for those of you on CBC News Network, thanks for watching.
Before we get to part 2 of the interview, let's review how I ended up in Bridgetown, Nova Scotia. First off, I met this guy, Tim, from the Canadian Mosaic Project, who drove this van across Canada, taking photos of over 80,000 Canadians to date. He invited me to spend the weekend here at his place in the patio furniture, which was great, but had no internet. He also threw me an amazing backyard party where I met former Canadian military member Jim, who rides this 𝗔𝗯𝘂𝗫𝗏, and we hit it off. Jim's also a beekeeper and invited me over to use his Wi-Fi, patio, and set up an impromptu studio from an old milk crate and a sewing lamplight on my face. Now that you're up to speed, back to Live with Ian from Beekeeper Studios.
with Kix Marshall. He's dirt biking across Canada, trying new foods, and right now he's in Bridgetown, Nova Scotia. And Kix, you talked about the barbecued, was it sea lion? Is that what you had?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Sea lion for sure.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time now. Tell me another. Well, one of the things I heard you talking to our producer about is that you stumbled on a great debate in Quebec about the best tortilla. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's also interesting that inside of each culture within the country, there's also little subcultures, and they have their own dishes. And as an outsider from Alberta, who's not Quebecois, I was unaware that there was different tortillas, let alone very distinct ones. And so I was told that if I wanted to see a very authentic tortilla in Quebec, I should go to 𝗔𝗯cie if I'm saying that correctly.
You are saying that correctly, yep.
They have a tortilla 𝗔𝗯cie, and so I met some people. They invited me up to their little place up near 𝗔𝗯cie, and we made an authentic tortilla 𝗔𝗯cie with wild meats. And I don't speak French either, and so I had someone translate the entire event for me. And I felt quite honored to have a very traditional meal cooked by the locals, completely in a foreign language to me, and it was quite memorable. And it's also fun to tell people that you've had the best tortilla in Quebec, because then that sparks a debate about where the best tortilla comes from.
Yeah, and so many incredible things about your trip. The fact you're doing it on a dirt bike, the fact that you're focusing on local cuisine, but the other part is your connections with people, and how many people have literally opened their doors to you. I don't know. I find that incredible. What impact does it have on you?
It's amazing to know, like the world over, if you travel, Canadians are obviously really well known as some of the friendliest people on the planet. And to see that live is unbelievable. The people are so friendly and very welcoming. And if I ask someone about getting to know their culture or their cuisine, it's been 100% open door policy. And if they don't want to do it, they'll say, I recommend my mom or my aunt or what have you. And so people have invited me in to cook me dinner, and then they'll say, actually, why don't you spend the night, or we'll have a little party for you, and that sort of thing. I even met a guy on 𝗂𝗵𝗶𝘅 Island in New Brunswick, and I was looking for a local dish, and the people had suggested lobster rolls, and he was like, well, lobster rolls are good, but really most people can't afford the lobster roll locally. It's more of a tourist thing, and we make a lot of chowder. You should go over to my mom's house and meet Mrs. Tinker, who lives on Tinker's Alley, named after the family because they've been there for so long. And you drive down this little gravel road, and at the end of this little foggy laneway is a red house, and Mrs. Tinker on her walker comes through the window and says, come on in, I'll show you how to make the chowder. And it's like, these people don't know me from a hole in the wall. They don't know anything about me.
Wow.
They just said, come on in, we'll make you lunch. We'll send you with a to-go bag, and if you want somewhere to stay, you're welcome to use the spare room. It's like the people are unbelievable. It's been incredible how friendly the people are.
I think you wanted to start your trip after the snow stopped falling, and you didn't quite achieve that. I think there was some snow you had to deal with, and that you would want to end this trip when the snow starts to fly again. Is that going to happen?
Yeah, there was a couple little rules in place. One was about the food. I didn't want a Googleable experience anyone could take. And the second was I wanted to get from snow melt to snowfall. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to meet this guy. It's actually, I'm not going to say where he lives because he's a bit of a recluse and he lives in the mountains in BC. He's from France, and he's a French pastry chef. He makes chocolates and ice creams and that kind of thing. And he built himself a little hobbit house up in the wood. Mm-hmm. And he said, if you come and meet me, you can do it, but I'm leaving in April for a month. So it'd have to be before then. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Canadian Rockies in March, but it's not the most time to travel. I set off in the snow with my dirt bike, and I carried a drill and some studs in case I had to stud the tires, and made my way through a few snowstorms up to his place. It was a bit like, it was a little bit questionable to say the least, and my wife wasn't impressed with my timeline, but I made it and it was fine. And the next step, now that we've gone from Haida Gwaii to essentially Cape Spear, Newfoundland, the next stop on my list was Yukon, which doesn't make sense on the map, but it's the closest.
Does not make sense, Kix. But anyway, you go ahead.
It's the closest point to where I live in Alberta, and I wanted to leave it till the end because I knew if I went there first, it took too long, I'd miss Newfoundland. And so that's the last stop on this trip is the Yukon, where I'm headed essentially from Nova Scotia, where I am now. And I'm really hoping that the weather holds and we have maybe a marginal El Nino year or something where it's warm until the end of October. So if you have any friends in the Yukon who can hook me up with with a local regional dish, Ian, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, and it's worked out for you so far. Listen, there is no situation where I'm going to get on a dirt bike and go across the country, but you have inspired me to consider two things. One is seeing more of Canada, and the other one is trying more local foods. People have opened their doors to you, and you've opened our eyes to just all the adventures that are possible out there, Kix. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ian. I really appreciate the time. And yeah, if anyone has any suggestions for me at all, that'd be great. Just one province left. They can just Google my name, Kix Marshall, and send me their suggestion. That'd be very helpful. I really appreciate it, Ian.
Yeah, and in fact, that has worked for you, right? Like you've been getting, like you kind of just put your name out there and you've been getting fantastic suggestions and help from people, right?
Yeah, I did. The first couple were a bit tricky because I just picture in my head, like, who's this crazy person who wants in our house to have lunch? But once we broke into a few doors, I shouldn't say broken, once we got into a few doors, and I could show some social proof that I'd been in and it went well, then it basically snowballed from there. I almost had too much help. Like on the East Coast is ridiculously friendly as far as friendly people go. Mm-hmm. And people were like, come to my house, I'll take you fishing. We'll go out and catch cod. You can have cod tongue and britches at our house. Spend the weekend. Come over to my aunt's place. We'll have a barbecue on the beach. We'll cook lobsters. And it was actually almost too much, but you don't want to say no to a good thing. So we let it keep rolling.
Fantastic, Kix. Really nice talking to you and safe travels.
Thanks a lot, Ian. I'll talk to you soon. Have a great evening.
Kix Marshall is a travel writer. He is in Bridgetown, Nova Scotia right now.